VR is a niche market, so unlike other platforms, funding is essentially either impossible or a nightmare. So if there's something in VR we want, we kinda have to fund it as a community. That's where crowdfunding comes in. Passionate people can share their visions and ask the general community for funding if it's something we as a community want. There's a lot of crowdfunding out there, but from what I've seen, VR is probably one of the most susceptible markets that get crowdfunders. VR is new, and as such, a lot of those more specific wants and niches haven't been filled. This leads to a lot of crowdfunding opportunities. So let's start with the literal start of VR Kickstarters, Oculus itself. Yeah, a lot of people don't know this, but Oculus originally started as a Kickstarter, promising a headset that looks nothing like what we actually wound up getting, and the big kicker here being no controllers. Yeah, this was funding for essentially a modern-day Virtual Boy designed for you to sit at your desk and play with your ball sack while playing your favorite games at 13 FPS in VR. You gotta keep in mind, this was 2016. PCs, while powerful, typically were not very VR ready. Pretty much, only top-of-the-line PCs could realistically handle VR, so the one you used for all your other games may not have been up to snuff for VR specifically. Nowadays, most mid-range gaming PCs are plenty capable of playing most VR games, but back then a mid-range PC probably wouldn't cut it. Regardless, it was an exciting new technology, and for $500, which equates to around $700 today, you could get an Oculus Rift dev kit with the first Oculus-ready game. Doom 3 BFG. Thrilling, I know. I'm gonna go ahead and say this Kickstarter was pretty successful, considering most of you have a headset as a result of this Kickstarter. Plenty of people bought those original Oculus dev kits, and even more people bought the Oculus Rift when it finally launched. Eventually, the Oculus Rift touch controllers would finally release, and they were so good that the same controller layout is used today in headsets like the Quest 3 and PSVR 2. For better or for worse, thank God Valve is innovating the layout at least a little bit, bro. These two nipples with the trigger is not cutting it for all these games anymore. Our next crowdfunder is SlimeVR. Targeted at people interested in full body, the goal here is to make an affordable full body tracking solution that doesn't require expensive base stations. With the lack of a base station requirement comes a couple of key benefits. No needing to have base stations plugged in and drilled into your wall, it's much cheaper, and you can wear a blanket while you cuddle up with your favorite virtual femboy. It sounds pretty awesome on paper, but there are a few drawbacks here. The lack of base stations mean that you can't get the perfect tracking you get with a laser camera pointed at your play space. Instead, the SlimeVRs rely on manual calibration and IMUs to track. These IMUs can drift over time and usually need to be recalibrated every once in a while, which personally I'm sort of mixed on. With slimes, it's sort of a pros versus cons situation. On one hand, they are so much cheaper than base station based solutions. On the other hand, you can tell because you need to recalibrate every so often, and there's a much more complex setup. I do think SlimeVRs are good if you just want to have some full body presence in VR chat, which to be fair is the main usage for a lot of people, as most games don't really have full body support, and that's coming from someone who has Tundra Trackers. Speaking of Tundra Trackers, if you wanted to play something like Blade and Sorcery with full body tracking, which requires more precise and high octane movement, then you may be more interested in something like the Tundra Trackers. This crowdfunded project is essentially just an alternative for Vive trackers, aiming to be smaller, lighter, and have a better battery life. They still rely on base stations, so they aren't too special, and are pretty much just Vive trackers, but made by what I can only guess is a VR chat furry. Another thing Tundra advertises is their magic USB Tundra dongle that up to 3 trackers can connect to make your USB experience simpler, only relying on one dongle as opposed to Vive trackers which need a dongle per tracker. My Tundra dongle can connect 3 trackers, but whichever one I connect third has crazy fucking issues and runs like shit, so I had to buy a Vive tracker dongle for my third tracker anyway, which at that point my Tundra dongle is only saving me a total of 1 USB port. So at that point, I guess it's the thought that counts. I didn't even bother trying to get my Tundra dongle fixed since I hardly use them as is, And I'm not in a romantic relationship with anyone on VR chat, and I also don't play a lot of Blade and Sorcery, so I kinda have no usage for my trackers most of the time. Spent like $400 on those, so maybe I should become a VR stripper or something to get my money's worth. In terms of full body tracking, there are also the Flux Pose trackers, which use a magnetic tracking system to be really precise like base station track devices, but without the need for base stations. They seem really cool and they're super exciting, but as of the time of writing this, they aren't available yet, so I'd be cautiously optimistic about them just in case. Not every crowdfunded VR project is hardware or trackers though. There's crowdfunded software as well. Starting with the good, Ancient Dungeon VR is a really fun and replayable VR roguelike dungeon crawler, which to my surprise was initially a Kickstarter. I remember playing this game on Quest years ago thinking, oh, this is pretty cool, and was wondering why it wasn't on PC at the time, and it turns out that's because one of the stretch goals was for an early release of the game to come out on Quest. Actually, all of the stretch goals were met, and for the longest time, I had no idea that this game was a Kickstarter. It genuinely is just an incredible game and no glaze. Speaking of glaze, Project Mix. Not because I'm about to glaze this game, but because the characters in this game get my tip glazed. Project Mix is an in-development game with a Kickstarter that I really love based on the demo I played. You should play it too if you haven't already, because sticky tip aside, the actual game is pretty damn good. The game is essentially a VR visual novel where you serve drinks, and the story and characters are really well written so far, and it's a game that I think is going to be good as hell. But as much as I am hopeful for this game, and I do really like it, it's important to mention that this game isn't out yet, and not every crowdfunding project goes well. I'm not saying this one won't, but just to always take any crowdfunded project with at least a hint of skepticism. Here's what's probably the most iconic semi-crowdfunded VR project that seemed very real and promising, but wound up ultimately going nowhere. This headset was planned to have full Valve Index level finger tracking, face tracking, eye tracking, wireless capabilities, and even some slight standalone support, all while being inside-out tracked. Sounds awesome, right? Well, the real kicker that got everyone excited was the price tag, which was aiming to be only $450 if you spent $10 to reserve the product. This was back in 2021, so to say this was too good to be true was an understatement. Most people were thinking, how was a product this insanely competent so affordable? It doesn't make any sense. And yeah, it doesn't. The fucker never shipped. Deca Gear wasn't a crowdfunded project, but they did take money in the form of the $10 pre-orders and the sales of the Deca Move, their hip-based rotation tracker that was essentially a little gyroscope that did actually wind up shipping, but the headset itself never shipped, leaving anyone who pre-reserved down $10 and potentially had some information they used on the Deca Gear website stolen. So it must suck to be an idiot who thought the Deca Gear was real. I would know. I'm an idiot. Please don't dox me all. Yeah, I was super excited for this thing. It's essentially everything I've ever wanted in a VR headset. But even though the Deca Gear never wound up being real, the Steam Frame is essentially everything the Deca Gear was, but better and without face tracking. Also, the codename for the Steam Frame was called the Valve Deckard, which seems like a cute little nod to the Deca Gear, even if unintentional. So, in a way, it's cool that the concept of the Deca Gear was so ahead of its time, even if the Deca Gear itself never wound up actually shipping. Hopefully I don't go 2 for 2 and the Steam Frame actually winds up shipping, or I'll just kill myself. That's not the only example of cool shit that was never released. Here's the Shockwave, a VR bodysuit that was going to be a haptic vest and full body tracker all in one, and was planning to be just under $300. Most people were thinking, how is a product this so insanely competent so affordable? It doesn't make any sense. And yeah, it doesn't. Go ahead and guess what happened. This suit looked really promising, and some people did actually wind up getting a product. Thrillseeker still has a video showcasing what could have been, and it was another IMU-based full body tracker, meaning you'd have to recalibrate, which again, I'm not a fan of personally, but it doesn't really matter because Shockwave rug pulled almost $200,000 and ran away. Sweet! Not every crowdfunded project that goes poorly is the result of it never shipping though. Take a look at the Etee VR controllers. These are a real product that did ship, and some people liked them, but personally, I hate the idea of these. They're finger tracking controllers with no buttons. The idea is that they're super light and comfortable, with buttons being simulatable by pressing certain areas of the thumb rest touchpad. I think for gaming, these are awful. I'm sorry, but I'm a big fan of buttons and think they're super important and cool. On their Kickstarter page, they talk about how buttons are so out of date. Does your phone have buttons anymore? No, it doesn't. That's because buttons are for fat old chuds. And for like productivity, I guess I agree, but we're talking about games. That tactical, physical button press is important for knowing confidently the button you clicked was actually clicked. Have you ever tried to play an emulated game on your phone's touchscreen? You probably know it sucks big bouncy booty butt cheeks, and while buttons aren't as important in VR as you can interact with things in more ways than just buttons, I would hate to swipe my finger on a touchpad to walk around in a VR game. I would know. I used to play Bone Lab using the Valve Index's touchpad due to the stick drift on my dirty ass controller. That old controller did not survive the great Minibattle lopping, by the way. So yeah, I'm sorry y'all, not a big fan of the ETs at all, and I'm glad it seems Valve agrees since they doubled up on the buttons with the Steam frames, so that's pretty cool. Now, onto our final project, and what I'd consider one of the most controversial crowdfunding failures for a VR game. A game that promised so much, yet delivered so little. Zenith. Wait, hold on a second, please wait one goddamn second. You guys will probably castrate me if I talk poorly about this game, so I'm not going to. I got Awakened Toast here as a punching bag, so please redirect your hatred to him instead of me. Thank you.
So now, let's talk about Zenith VR. Arguably one of the most popular VR releases we've ever seen in virtual reality history. I just have to say, from my heart and the amount of time that I put into this game, this is still by far one of my top VR games I have ever played, but it's just really sad to see the direction that the game took after the devs basically went ahead and kind of abandoned the game. But do you know what else was arguably one of the best VR games of all time? Angry Birds for the PlayStation VR. Even with all the other competition that we have with other VR MMOs in the landscape, there has still been nothing that's ever touched, I would say, even the battlegrounds of where Zenith VR even sits. Ever since I started playing this game and I started following the project, I fell in love with the vision that they brought on this title. Not only was it bringing a MMO style to the game, but also it was something for a lot of the anime fans out there, and me being an absolute nerd with it, this basically was my Sword Art Online VR dream coming to a reality. Zenith went from a game where it could have possibly lived for years upon years upon years if they just would have continued supporting it. But unfortunately, the project got abandoned for a free-to-play mode, and then they also abandoned that. So now, we're left here in a barren landscape with really no players, no activity, and no updates to really look forward to. But hey, you Burger King Loppers, welcome to the Zenith portion of this video. If you enjoy MMOs and you played this game, you understand the pain that this community went through. Zenith actually started off by doing a Kickstarter, which absolutely blew their original milestones. I mean, just this Kickstarter alone basically showed the entire dev team and also the VR community that we all wanted a good MMO. And from the looks of it at the time, Zenith VR was the most promising project we've ever seen up until the date. So basically, me being a super big anime nerd SAO fanboy, I was scavenging the internet for anything relating to VR Sword Art Online. And that is when, voila, Miss Zenith decided to pop into my recommendations. I played through the alphas and the betas, and I put roughly about 250 hours just into these closed betas and alpha tests. So just judging by those playtest weekends and the amount of time I soaked in, this game was gonna slap on release. Except it didn't. So instead of going and fixing issues that were very prevalent in the beta 2 build, they instead basically just released the game like a month later with nearly the exact same version of what we witnessed in the beta. And let's just say the game was a little unfinished when it first released. But regardless, the game released and the game was thriving. And by thriving, I mean like 3,000 players on Steam in one day. That was actually really big for PC VR at the time, because most of the players were actually over on the Quest 2. But then, disaster struck, because as many other VR games in the scene really struggle with, is the fact of longevity and replayability. Once a lot of the players reached the end game and got to level 40, there really wasn't anything to do other than just go and yap. I basically consider this game VR chat with a purpose. You're basically just going around VR chatting, and then just kind of going brainlessly, like farming mobs, going for godstones, and a few other grindable items. It only took about a month for the servers to have a really big player fall off. Granted, what I will say is that the MMO genre is probably the hardest nut to crack on both flat screen and especially in virtual reality. But the thing that drives me nuts is Zenith had it, bro. They had funding, they had the players, they had the entire game ready. Like, this game, all it needed was polish and support, and this game would have lived for tens of years. All right, I'm gonna crash out. All right, leave this in, Mr. Mini Lopper, all right? Like, dude, I don't understand how you fumble this so hard. I was so passionate about this game. I was creating an entire series for it. I cared so deeply for this game. I was so invested with the player base, with the content, with literally everything. I wanted to make any excuse to basically live in virtual reality and just play this game. But it's almost like the team saw the success and what players actually wanted, and then they basically did a U-turn and did everything the opposite way. Crazy idea, but if most of your player base is all at the end game content, maybe create new maps and new content for the new, like the players that are actually playing the game. Because this game was not cheap. It was not free to play. The gateway, I think, was, what, $30 or $40? So I would say this was on the higher tiers for what VR games and studios were ever charging. Something I had suggested quite a few times was just making the game free to play. Because after Zenith had most of their main orders already surged at the beginning of the game's life cycle, it would have made so much more sense to just go and re-release the game as a free-to-play model, and then add a subscription to the game so they could actually have a funding that helps provide them for future updates. But nope, instead of going and doing that for the amazing world and game they already built, they decided it was a great idea to go and create a new free-to-play game that was based on Zenith the Last City, but it was separate from Zenith the Last City. It made no sense. They literally redeveloped things that they already had in this world as a free-to-play game when they could have just made this free to play. It made no sense. They put so much extra work, so much extra time, so much more extra effort, everything into this new mode, this little mini game that was pee-pee poo-poo ball sack testicles. It was so bad. Like, I don't understand who in the right mind thought that was the business move to go and make when everyone in this community was screaming, hey, we're here, we love it, and we want you to keep supporting it, so please, just get people in the game. I just honestly cannot believe how hard they fumbled what they had here. I don't get it. And also, apologies for the scattered thoughts. I'm recording this at 10 p.m. and I just got my wisdom teeth removed. But Minnie hit me up on Discord. He's like, hey, do you want to yap about Zenith and put this in a video? And I was like, absolutely. I need to speak on this now. So yeah, what it comes down to is Zenith had so much support, so much funding, but they somehow fumbled the entire bag. And it's really sad to see how it all went down. So yeah, with that being said, I'm going to be done yapping. And this is the end to the video or something.
Thank you, Toast, for the words of wisdom. Everybody go subscribe to him. His links are in the description, so, you know, go check that out. VR Kickstarters are both great and awful at the same time. Sometimes they go great, sometimes they don't, and that's okay. If you see a Kickstarter, maybe you should temper your expectations, because on one hand, don't instantly give up on it. It could come out and be something really great, but on the other hand, don't assume it'll come out or you might wind up spending $10 on something that doesn't exist and wind up on a shady website. Regardless, those were some of the most notable VR crowdfunded projects. If you enjoyed this video, you'll probably like this one where I talk about the prices of VR games and how they can be quite goated in comparison to regular games. You can also get 10% off the entire Quest store using the link in the description. It's the best way to support the channel other than subscribing, which you should do if you like these videos. VR is pretty niche, so I can't really make more of these videos without you guys. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next time. Fat bitches. Lops and kisses!